That day up there. I want to be there really good.
Not here, it's just a potluck. You guys go to potluck.
Take back off, buddy, back off.
There was a Nebraska guy yesterday, there was something about eating at
I didn't know that,
I don't think I've ever said it. I'll say,
you guys are doing a good job starting. Good morning, everyone.
Can't hear me? I did. Can you hear me now? Yeah. It's on. Okay, because the red light's blinking, so I don't know if that. Okay, so it's on. So I got to speak up even anyway. Well, I'll tell you what. This morning when I woke up, I was in the middle of a very heavy dream, and I'm still trying to get myself together. So a little bit more coffee might help me become somewhat eligible to teach this class. Anyway, it's a beautiful day out there. And it's a beautiful day for a potluck too, right? Okay, I want to make sure about that too, because I'm trying to get my mental files back in order here. And good to have John and Stacy here and Jeremy. And so we've been looking at the Gospel of Mark. And last week we looked at Mark 14, where Jesus is arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin. And through a series of false accusations and attempts by the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews in Jerusalem to get Jesus criminally condemned, they finally, when Jesus finally says that, I am the Son of Man and I am coming on the right hand of the Father. And to them, the Jewish leaders, that's blasphemy because only God could make a statement like that. And as I mentioned, admitting you were the Messiah wouldn't necessarily be a capital offense, but the chief priests knew that Jesus' actions in Jerusalem the few days before, right, overturning the temple tables and everything, was could be interpreted by the Romans as a precursor to a revolt. And during the festival of Passover, the Romans were always very nervous because the Jewish people resented Rome, and when they got together, that was a prime opportunity for insurrection to take place. And so they usually brought in more Roman troops during that time to make sure, and they were guarding over the temple walls to check on everything. So I'm sure that they probably witnessed Jesus' actions and were wondering what was going on. But for the Jewish leaders, simply declaring yourself Messiah was not necessarily blasphemous, although rabbinic tradition says that they believed that only God could announce the beginning of the Messiahship. So when Jesus says that and refers to himself sitting at the right hand of the Father, that guaranteed it as far as the chief priests were concerned. Like, oh, he's committed blasphemy. Now, according to Josephus and other Roman history, when Rome was in charge of a province like Judea, the leaders of the people did have the right to legislate and even to condemn a person to execution. And Judea was given quite a bit of leeway, but Rome was also very clear that whatever province you were in, that the final decision and the carrying out of any execution had to be done by Roman authorities. Okay. So the Jewish leaders could not themselves kill Jesus. And Jewish tradition at that time, usually if the Jews would execute somebody, it'd be by hanging. And even when they were stoning somebody, they would usually stone them after they hung, because it was considered to be a great abomination to hang and die on a tree, according to Jewish and even Old Testament sayings. So now the Jewish leaders have condemned Jesus, and they know, okay, the next thing we got to do is take this guy to Pilate. Now, Pilate began ruling in about 26 AD and ruled for about 10 years. And it used to be that some didn't believe that Pilate really was a historical figure. But we have since found coins with the name and image of Pilate, and we found an inscription, a stone, part of a wall with Pilate's name. So we know that Pilate did exist, and at this time, and Josephus also alludes to Pilate. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Pilate other than that. We don't know, he came from Rome, but we don't know his background, or even when he finally gets recalled to Rome, we don't know what happened to him. He was called to Rome because in about 36 AD, there was a rebellion or an uprising in Samaria that he put down very harshly. So much so that his superior in Syria decided to remove him and send him to Rome. And it's probably the case that when Pilate got to Rome that he retired. That's why we didn't hear anything else about him. He wasn't reassigned or anything. And he just disappears from history. But Pilate must have been somewhat confident, because you don't rule for 10 years unless you're doing something right according to Rome. But apparently his reaction to Samaria was so harsh and considered to be unnecessary that he was recalled, and that was it for Pilate. So that happened probably maybe 3 or 4 years after this event described in Mark 15. Jesus in verse 1, very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Now, Pilate is, at that time, during the feast, the Roman governor or prefect was usually living in the praetorium in Jerusalem, which would be pretty close to the Jerusalem walls of the temple. And again, the Jewish leader would be, the Roman leader would be there because of the potential disturbances at any feast. So that's why he was brought there and not to Caesarea, where the governor usually resided. So the Jewish leaders bring him to Pilate. And now in verses 2 through 5, Jesus is before Pilate. Now, had Jesus had any sleep that night? No. The disciples got so tired they fell asleep. But Jesus didn't. Now, imagine, have any of you ever stayed up all night? Okay. I know as a student, I tried to avoid that, but there was one night that I miscalculated how many finals I had, and I had to stay up all night. That was at University of Iowa. And the only thing I just remember drinking a 32-ounce cup of tea with me. And I was still really tired. If you've ever been up all night, you know you're tired, your body doesn't feel right, your mind is, it's just kind of fuzzy. And so you can imagine at this point, standing before the Roman authority and realizing, you're going to be asked questions and condemned. How would you feel? How would you feel if you were in Jesus' spot? And other Jewish men had been in that spot before being brought before Caesar, because crucifixion happened so often that this had to occur. Imagine being a prisoner and standing in front of this guy, and the only way you know what he's saying is because there's a translator there. There was always a translator. And you're just exhausted. Okay? So imagine Jesus standing there. And I would imagine, what do you think Pilate would usually see with a Jewish prisoner in front of him? What kind of image of the prisoner would he have in his mind? Someone who's scared? I'd be scared. Okay? Maybe someone who's angry. If you were an insurrectionist, which were often brought before Pilate, they would be looking you in the eye and giving you the eye, because you are the enemy. And you probably, at that point, I don't care. I'm willing to die for my country. Okay? So Pilate would have seen, several faces, several reactions. One of, fear, despair, rage. Maybe some even cried. But let's see how Jesus reacts. Pilate has already been told, or maybe given a written summary by the Jewish authorities of the charges. Because the first thing he asks is, are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? Now, he wouldn't have automatically asked that unless he'd been told that that was the charge, okay? So he's getting right to the quick of things. Now, in the New International Version, which is what I'm reading from, it says, Jesus replied, yes, it is as you say. I think that's a little misleading. I double-checked the Greek. And the Greek actually says, you say so. Or, so you assert. And judging by Pilate's reaction, you can tell that Jesus probably didn't just say, yes, I am. And when Jesus said, so you assert, who was he looking at, you think? Pilate? Anybody else? Yeah, the Jewish leaders. I could imagine, there's no proof of this, but I could imagine that Jesus, while he said this, so you assert, or that's your assertion, that he might have also looked at the Jewish leaders sitting probably fairly close to him, because Pilate would have been in the center. So you assert. And if that's the case, then it gives us even more understanding as to why Pilate begins to doubt what's going on here. So you assert. Okay. The chief priests began accusing him of many things. What do you think some of the things were that they accused him of? Blasphemy, yeah. Would that have really mattered to Pilate? Nah. I'm not interested in your religious things. Okay, this one God business I don't agree with anyway. Okay, what other accusations?
The violence of throwing of the money at the temple.
I'm sorry, what?
The violence of throwing of the money in the temple.
Yeah, okay. This guy went in the temple and was overthrowing the temple like an insurrectionist. Probably word something like that. Okay. What other charges, maybe? Breaking the Sabbath. Yeah, I remember earlier in the gospel, Jesus is criticized by many of the Jewish teachers for breaking the Sabbath. Your disciples are plucking grain on the Sabbath. Jesus says, man is not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for the man. Okay. Yes.
The thing that would have probably got his attention is that he claimed to be God, which would challenge Caesar.
Yeah, if the Jewish authorities put it that way, he claimed to be the God, then maybe Pilate would have, well, wait a minute, only Caesar is God. Although the Romans would acknowledge that Caesar is not the only God. So that probably would not have been the difference for Pilate. What? Yes. Now, if he said he was the king, and when the Jewish authorities mentioned Jesus' claim to be the Messiah, that would have been a heads up to any Roman leader, because they undoubtedly understood to be the Messiah meant you were the king of the Jews, that you were going to be in charge of Judea. And then it puts it in a whole different category. But these chief priests are, maybe to back up their claim about this blasphemy too, they might have gone back and mentioned that he claims to forgive sins. Okay, now they felt that was blasphemous for Jesus to claim that he has that authority. But again, would that hold much water with Caesar, with a Roman leader? I don't think so. Well, hey, look, if he did it, so much of he claims that he could forgive sins too. No problem with me. So,
Some of them believed it were God.
what?
Some of the Roman leaders thought that they were God.
Oh, yes. the Roman leaders proclaimed to be sons of the gods or gods, definitely. And some later would take it to very large extremes. Nero, for example, who would come about here pretty soon, and then later Domitian. And that became a real conflict because Christians were then expected to sacrifice to Caesar, to proclaim Caesar as God, and Christians couldn't do that. They could claim it, that Caesar is master and king and emperor and our leader, but they couldn't claim, nor could the Jews, that any Caesar is God, because there's only one God and he's not an earthly figure. So Pilate then, he notices, how does Jesus react when all these accusations are flying toward him? How would you react? Have you ever been in a situation, maybe at work or somewhere else, where people are accusing you of something? What's your reaction? Yeah, you start defending yourself. Like, I didn't do that. I didn't say that. He's lying. She's totally wrong. Yeah. Just ask Bill over here. He'll prove to you that what this guy is saying is not true. Or if you were an insurrectionist, how would you respond? Maybe. Yeah, I did it, and I'd do it again. So what of it, Pilate? You know? Yeah, you're next, right. Well, that would seal it right there. So what is Pilate's reaction when Jesus doesn't even say a word? Doesn't seem, he just seems to be, okay.
You can't understand why you don't say.
Yeah, the Greek word there is thaumazo, I believe it is, and it can be translated differently. He was amazed, he wondered, he was astounded. Now he's puzzled. Why isn't he saying anything? Why isn't he defending himself? This is your opportunity right here. Don't you realize what's at stake? Jesus just, no response. And so Pilate's got to be figuring out, okay, well, there's something wrong with this case. Something's not right. Okay? Most of these charges don't have any relevance to me or the role. And the one charge, the potential insurrectionist, the king who might try to overthrow the empire, he doesn't say anything about that. He just gave a non-committal answer, just referred to the fact that that's their assertion. Yes? No, we really don't. More than likely, I don't know. It's possible he was the same. Well, he probably would have been about 30 when he was appointed. So maybe he was about 10 years older than Jesus. But again, we just don't know. Now, later on, in the 4th or 5th century, there's all sorts of apocalyptic accounts about Pilate. And it names his wife and all this, and describes what he did beforehand and what he did afterward. There's some that even claim that Pilate became a Christian. But those are so much later that we can't count on those as being historically reliable at all. But Pilate's just scratching his head at this point. This is not fitting in with whatever else he's seen in the previous, 7 years maybe. Now, Pilate remembered, and the Jewish leaders knew, that there was a tradition during the feast, especially the Feast of Passover. And what was that tradition? To release a prisoner. Since there was so much tension and so much resentment, the Roman authorities felt like, okay, this would be a nice gesture. This would keep things calm. And we do know that this did happen because Josephus later refers to it as, and also rabbinic tradition refers to the release of a prisoner by the Roman authority on especially the Passover feast. So we know that historically this did happen. So Pilate decides, okay, well, hey, maybe there's another way out of this. Since it seems so confusing to him, he said, okay, well, maybe let's look about who should we release? Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Now, how do you think he might have sounded? What tone do you think he might have used when he said, do you want me to release the King of the Jews? Yeah, almost like quotes, right? Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? You know, I don't think Pilate was real convinced at this point about these charges. And verse 10 says he knew it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to them. Now, more than likely, the crowd had already been assembled even before all this happened. And most of the crowd there probably had no idea about this Jesus situation. They had already pre-assembled because was Barabbas a popular insurrectionist? More than likely. And even though this insurrection had apparently led in killing, and he was one among several, very likely the crowd already, before even the chief priests stirred them up, already was there for the release of Barabbas. That's who they wanted. He was popular. He was well regarded. And this insurrection we don't know anything else about. There's no, Josephus doesn't mention it, nor anybody else, but insurrections happen very frequently during this time. So it's not surprising that even Josephus doesn't mention it. It must not have been a large event. But the chief priests, they noticed that these people are here, and they said, look, hey, this is your chance, Barabbas. So they get on the release Barabbas, but let Jesus go ahead and be convicted. So Pilate then asked, what shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews? And they shouted, crucify him. Now, very likely, the Jewish authorities were behind that claim. Crucify him. They had other alternatives. He could have been imprisoned. He could have been flogged. And in a minute, we'll talk about how bad that was. But they want to get rid of Jesus. Okay. There's no half measures in their mind. And the crowd basically the chief priests must have in some ways encouraged them to say, look, have Jesus be crucified. He wants to crucify somebody, so let it be Jesus, and Barabbas can be free. Okay? That's what you guys came for.
They had wanted Jesus dead for quite some time. They just didn't have the opportunity. Now they got the opportunity in their season. And they're using Rome to do the dirt.
Well, exactly. Rome would be the one power that could do it. And also crucifixion, even among Romans, was considered the most gruesome and most scandalous way to die. Roman historian Tacitus, writing a little bit later than this, not too much later though, and Josephus and other Jewish writings of the time, going back to the time, mentioned that crucifixion, dying on a tree, was an abomination. That's someone you would send only as a last resort to really rub it in, so to speak. Yes.
It may have been also that Pilate was trying to get them to free Jesus to keep the power balance between the people that were opposed to Rome at each other's throats, not trying to. If people divided aren't going to attack you. Keep them in control.
Well,
And that's why he was trying to get him. Why don't you want that? Going back, why don't you want this person to be Pilate?
yeah, and it may be that Pilate wasn't completely convinced that Jesus should be freed. You're right. I mean, there's a lot going on here, back and forth, politically, as well as socially, and in terms of the religious dimension. But Pilate's just not sure. I mean, when the chief priests really get the crowd going, Pilate says, why? What crime has he committed? Now, did he say that because he was really doubtful that Jesus had committed any crime? Or did he say that, again, to kind of play up, I'm standing on this side, you guys decide? Hard to say. And they shouted all the louder, crucify him. Now we know from Roman authorities, as well as Josephus, the Jewish historian, writing about 30 years later, that the one thing a Roman official did not want was a crowd becoming more and more boisterous, more demanding. Because what could that possibly lead to? A riot. And who knows, especially in Jerusalem at that time with the previous problems, a riot here could spread. And pretty soon you've got a whole rebellion. This is what happened in.
Policy, if you were in charge, you couldn't keep order, they'd exile you.
Yeah, Pilate's job, first off, is to keep Roman order. That's why they had prefects in different places. And the Roman authorities knew, even in Rome, that Judea was not the garden spot to be a ruler in.
Say something to him about.
One of the other Gospels that does mention that Pilate's wife had a dream. He said, "Don't mess with this guy." Yeah, and Pilate didn't want to. Maybe that was, and that Gospel is implying that that's one of the doubts Pilate has. Okay. So this crowd is getting out of control. And Pilate does not want a full-scale rebellion. Later on in 66 AD, as I was starting to say, that rebellion started in the sanctuary area. A relatively small group. The chief priests didn't like the attempt and the actual infiltration of the temple by Romans. That started the whole rebellion. So Pilate had legitimate concerns. Yeah, I don't know about this, but I got to make sure I do my job. My job is to keep everything in order. Was Rome very big on order? Oh, yeah. Gruesomely so at times. And so with the crowd being totally stirred up, they have played Pilate's hand. There's nothing else he can do. And so, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. We don't know what happened to Barabbas. Some, again, traditions say that he became a Christian because he became aware of what happened, who Jesus was. We don't know. And then Pilate, and this was usually done, before crucifixion, a prisoner was flogged. So Jesus was immediately flogged. And often it would be done in a public spot so other people could see, because it was, that and crucifixion was to be a warning sign to the whole community. But in this case, it's done in the courtyard of Pilate's Praetorium. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a boy, I had brothers, and sometimes we would mess around. We would be watching the Rifleman or Gunsmoke, and you'd see these scenes about somebody being whipped. And there were a few times we tried to see what that would be like, and we found out real quick. And we didn't have the actual whips that they kind of used. But the snap of the whip, we wanted to see if we could duplicate that. You do crazy things as boys. But nobody got seriously hurt. Okay, I don't have any lashing marks on my back. But I do remember my brother and I, who were just about a year and a half apart, we did try it once. I think we concluded very quickly. But we had to try it. I think I might have started with him, and then, okay, now it's your turn, Mike. Okay, I agree. Let's not do this again. But anyway, flogging was done with leather straps, and the leather was often fitted with bones or pieces of lead. And Josephus gives an account of flogging. In fact, he had one of his soldiers flogged, and he describes it. And the idea was to tear skin off the back. And there's no specific mention in Roman sources about how many times a person could be whipped in this situation. But there is evidence from sources that oftentimes prisoners died just from the flogging. So here you have Jesus, a man who hasn't slept, who's dead tired. Do you think he was feeling stressed out internally? I think Jesus was.
He was struggling with the fact that he had to go through this.
Yeah, he prayed about that, didn't he, even beforehand? He knew what was coming. And now here it is.
He still has to.
Yes. And so he was feeling it. And we don't know how many times he was actually lashed, but it was brutal. And again, people frequently died just from that. They were supposed to flog a person really, really badly, but not kill him. But sometimes that, it happened anyway. So even at this point, Jesus has experienced enormous humiliation, pain, insult. So they finish flogging him, and then they get all the soldiers together in the Praetorium and decide, okay, let's have fun with this guy. And so what do? His charge is he's the king of the Jews.
So they put a robe on him.
They put a purple robe. Why a purple robe?
Royalty.
It's royalty, yeah. Okay, Jesus, here, king, we'll put this robe on you. And what else do they put on? crown of thorns. What did that represent? Not a crown per se, but oftentimes the Roman leaders would have a laurel, a wreath. So that's what that represents. Because the Roman emperors did not have crowns per se. It's not like further on. They usually had a laurel wreath, a special one. And so he's got a robe on. He's got the laurel wreath of royalty. And then what do? Yeah, they begin to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" You know, let's say Larry here is Jesus sitting before them. "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they're looking to the other soldiers. "Hail, King of the Jews!" And everybody's laughing. And yeah, what a king. Boy, look at him. They were just having a good old time. And then they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. And again, that was a customary insult for prisoners. We saw that happen in the Sanhedrin, where they spit on Jesus and said, "Who?" and hit him. And "Who hit you? You know, if you're such a prophet, you should know." Well, these Roman soldiers didn't think he was necessarily a prophet, but you know, they're going full tilt on mocking him. And then they fell on their knees and pretended to worship him. "Oh, King, we worship you, King of the Jews," you know, and you can just imagine, you know, the sarcastic voices and the expressions on their face, you know. So, would this feel humiliating? Yeah. Especially when you are the king. Okay?
And don't you think Jesus felt also just deep pity and sadness for these people who are condemning him and condemning his father?
Yeah, Jesus, as far as we know, is completely quiet during this. What do you think Jesus' facial expression might have been like? Pain, yeah. I mean, there were times that, you know, this hurt. Okay. I'm sure he probably said, "Ah," more than a few times. As I was reading this again yesterday, I you know, remember on the cross he says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." He had to have been thinking, I'm guessing he had to have been thinking that too. Father, forgive these Romans. They have no idea what they're really doing. Now, none of the Gospel says that, but I just can't imagine Jesus not thinking that, feeling that. So, Jesus is probably half dead from this flogging itself. And then the mocking and everything. He's exhausted. Then soldiers led Jesus away into the palace and called together the whole company of soldiers. And they put a purple robe. Okay, they took the purple robe off eventually and put his own clothes back on him, and then they let him out to crucify him. Now, again, Roman authorities and Josephus mentioned that usually there were four soldiers and one leading soldier who would be in charge of leading the prisoner. And they would intentionally go down a very public street because, again, they want everybody to know this is what happens to you if you defy Rome. Okay? By this time, the sun is up. They would wait to make sure that people were up and about. And remember, Jerusalem at this time is very busy. Lots of people there. They couldn't help but know, well, another crucifixion. Who is it this time? And you can imagine some of the disciples of Jesus who were staying there must have been shocked. What? Why are they crucifying him? Our master, our teacher, is being executed. And on the way, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country. He's just walking down, he's come in for the pet festival, and they say, hey, Simon, hey, you, come over here, you got to help, you got to carry this cross. Now, and we're running out of time, but the cross was, usually the prisoner would carry the horizontal beam, the smaller beam. But again, we have an idea of how exhausted and half dead Jesus was. He couldn't do it. Okay, so that tells you that Jesus is really in bad shape. And this Simon, it mentions Simon's sons, Rufus and Alexander, and later on Paul refers to, is it Rufus? So very possibly, we don't know for sure, but very possibly, one of these, or maybe both of these, became Christians. Maybe Simon himself too. So Jesus is so weak that he needs to get help. And I think we've run out of time. And so we will pick up from here where Jesus is led to the cross and crucified. Thank you for all of your participation. And I'm even half awake now. Shall we close with a prayer? Our Father, we thank you for the sacrifice that Jesus made. Just seeing what happened even before the cross itself is troubling. To imagine the pain and the humiliation that Jesus experienced, his extreme fatigue that he experienced before the cross. Let it remind us of what Jesus truly means and has done for us. In his name we pray. Amen.